Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk through topic 2 of paper 1, which is Britain 1625 to 1688. And topic 2 all is about religious change. The way to think about this topic is there's 3 key questions on the specification. So here they are. How effectively did the Church of England evolve in times of conflict and revolution? Why did religious dissent and nonconformity increase in the years 1625 to 88? And then finally, why and with what effects did fear of Roman Catholic influence increase under the Stuart monarchs? So, evolution of the Church of England, dissent and nonconformity, and then fear of Catholicism. So they're the 3 key questions to think about with this topic. So if we start off with the first one, how successfully did the Church of England evolve? You've got to think about the key words in this question. Okay, so what does it mean for something to be successful? Okay, so usually in history answers, what we say in history questions, I should say, is when you're thinking about your answer, if you're assessing the success of something, did it achieve its goals? Okay, did it achieve its goals? If you're, how successful was the Republic? How successful was the Civil Rights Movement? So think, what were the goals of these things, and what are they achieved? I guess it's the same in life, isn't it? How successful, if you've done something, you're assessing your success. Did you achieve your goals? So, in terms of success of the Church of England, you've got to think about, well, what were its goals? The Church of England. So something like it could be to establish religious uniformity. Could be a goal, couldn't it? To impose, a religious settlement. To either bring dissenters and nonconformists into the church, so you've got a broad church, so like religious toleration, or to crush dissent. Okay, so it depends which period. The goals could change. And then evolve is the other key term in this question. And for something to evolve, obviously that's changing, isn't it? So the way that the Church of England changed, did that meet its goals in these periods? So the way to think about this, and for this topic, actually, for the topic on religion, this is one of the only times in the A-level history, I think, where you might write essays by time period. Okay, usually I would say don't write essays by time period. It's generally not a good idea. But in this one, if you got a question, which was the whole topic, how successfully did the Church of England evolve, 1625 to 88, you could do it by time period. I'm not sure if they would ask such a broad question, but you never know. So the way to break this down is by time period, which I've done here in this pack. So think about what's going on in the initial period in terms of Church of England policies and how successful were they? So think about Laudian Reform, Charles I, Arminianism. How successful was that? So you could say, well, on one hand, he did impose a new religious settlement. So there's some success there. He did crush dissent. The Puritans, Burton, Bastwick, and Prynne were persecuted. However, and the big caveat here is that it's not that popular, is it? And there's an increasing backlash. Think about policies in Scotland as well. So that part you would say, on one hand, successful, new Arminian settlement, however, unsuccessful because of the backlash. And then from 1640 really to 1660, you've got initially the kind of Presbyterian long parliament. So they don't want bishops. They want to get rid of that hierarchical structure of the church. They arrest lords. But attempts to impose a Presbyterian church don't really succeed because of the war and the instability. And then following the execution of the king in 1649, you've got the passing of the Toleration Act, which leads to this rapid growth of nonconformity. And I don't know if you remember that email that I got from Ted Valance, where he says basically this is the end of the Church of England, really, in 1650, because you can't force people to go to the same church if if there's a Toleration Act in place, allowing people to worship freely. So this leads to this explosion of dissent. So the Church of England is really on a very low ebb at that point in the Republic. And then Cromwell tries to create some sort of church structure with policies like the triers and ejectors, if you remember, the moral order of the rule of the major generals. And this period of the Republic, as I said, leads to growth of nonconformity, like the Quakers, for example. So the church really is not evolving very successfully at this point. It's not really in existence in the same way. And then what happens after the Restoration is, as you know, the Cavalier Parliament elected in 1661, and the subsequent Clarendon Code really, really narrows the church, which is not what Charles II actually wanted. If you remember the Declaration of Breda in 1660, before he's restored, he wants religious toleration. But then because of the Fifth Monarchist uprising, Venner's uprising in 1661, you get the Cavalier Parliament and the kind of attempts to restore Anglican supremacy. Okay, and then despite Charles II and James II's attempts at toleration with the declarations of indulgence, Parliament still push this kind of narrow church settlement. Something like the Test Act as well is another example of that, really to crush any dissent. However, because of what's happened in the 40s and 50s and the failure of the Clarendon Code, that doesn't work, does it? So the church, if going back to this big question, was the church more powerful in 1625 or 1688? I think the answer is it's more powerful in 1625, because by 1688 there's much more dissent. Okay, and the attempt of the Clarendon Code to narrow the church ultimately fails. So I think of this as a graph: popularity and strength of the church. What would it look like? And for me, I think it would be quite high in 1625. Laudian reform might push it down a bit, then it drops dramatically after 1650. It goes up again in the 1660s, and then slowly declines because of the growth of dissent. Okay, so that's how you've got to think of this topic. Okay, that first question in this topic. All right, so on to the next question. And the next question, as I said, is about why did religious dissent and nonconformity increase? Okay, so you've got to think of the reasons for the growth of dissent and nonconformity in this period. So some things you could think about: the war, the political instability, the Toleration Act, the political instability in the war and the execution of the king, and the subsequent Toleration Act, which really kind of opens the lid and allows for a great, explosion of dissent. Groups like the Ranters, the Quakers, the Fifth Monarchists. You could say all of these groups emerged in this time of great instability. You could also say, so one reason could be War and Republic Toleration Act. You could put that all in one. Another one could be as a reaction. Dissent also emerges as a reaction to policy, and you could put together in that subheading Laudian reform and the growth of Puritan backlash as a result of Laudian reform, and also the growth of dissent as a result of the Clarendon Code. So that could be another reason, as a response, as a backlash to government legislation. And then the third reason, you could say dissent and nonconformity grows and survives, is support from leaders. So Cromwell, despite his kind of like his the view of Cromwell and amongst the general public and horrible histories and things, he was, for the 17th century, religiously tolerant. He did believe in religious toleration. Look at his support for James Naylor, the Quaker, for example. Obviously, he was virulently anti-Catholic, but in terms of Protestant toleration, he did support religious toleration, as you know. So support from leaders. So you've got Cromwell, you could talk about James Naylor. You've also got Charles II and James II in terms of issuing their declarations of indulgence. And you could say that's symbolic support for dissenters in this period. So they're the three kind of reasons, I think. So you've got the war, the Toleration Act, the Republic could be one. You've got backlash to legislation, could be a second one, and then you've got symbolic support from leaders, could be the third one. Okay, and in the war you could talk about as well the new model army, the end of censorship, all those things. So I hope that's clear for that one. Again, you could do it as a timeline. Okay, why did dissent grow? And I would probably have it quite low, jumping up high in the Republic, maybe declining a little bit and then slowly starting to rise after the Clarendon Code, something like that. So the third question for topic 2 is, why did fear of Catholicism increase? Okay, and again, I think a timeline's a really good way of looking at this. This is probably a little bit more straightforward than the other two because it's so linked to politics, isn't it? And when you get a fear of Catholicism question, often it's tied up actually in a kind of topic 1 question or topic 1/2. So if you think about fear of Catholicism, why did it grow? You've got Charles I, his marriage, Arminianism, his, the soap monopoly, his belief in divine right of kings. All of these things remind people of Catholic absolutists. Then you've actually got declining fear of Catholicism in the Republic. You've obviously got Cromwell's actions in Ireland, and then you've got a kind of continuation of anti-Catholic laws by Cromwell in the period of the Republic. But you'd say, as a whole, fear of Catholicism declines because there isn't a monarch that people are fearful of, potentially being Catholic. Obviously, Charles I isn't Catholic himself, but there's great fear of that. Following the Restoration, the initial issue is Protestant dissent and nonconformity, but then fear of Catholicism grows. And as you know about Charles II's marriage, the Great Fire of London, the Anglo-Dutch Wars, which are, England's fighting on the side of the Catholic French, and Louis XIV. That's linked to the Treaty of Dover. And then the real height of anti-Catholicism is, one peak actually is the Popish plot and the Exclusion Crisis, where Parliament want to keep James II off the throne because he is Catholic. And then James II comes to the throne in 1685, and initially fear of Catholicism actually declines because he's kind of working with Parliament, but then he starts issuing declarations of indulgence, promoting Catholics, and then the final straw is the birth of his son in 1688. So again, I would do this as a graph and just plot some key points on this, where fear of Catholicism rises during the reign of Charles II, then declines during the Republic, increases again during the reign of Charles II, and then speeds up and gets really high in the reign of James. Okay, so that's how I would think about that for fear of Catholicism. So they are the 3 key questions for topic 2. So I would, plan those out, do some graphs for those, think about it as the kind of factors. What factors are we looking at here for each question? And find the relevant evidence. So I hope that's been useful. Thanks.